Space, the final vacation frontier. Dennis Tito has shown that space tourism is possible, but we'll show you 10 ways that it's neither as practical nor as sexy as you may think.
4.5 million pounds of explosive.
Shaking around in there.
The cabin is engulfed in flame.
We wear diapers.
It would taste like cardboard.
The guy next to you just lost his lunch.
Of course, a lot of people get sick.
If you wanted to bring your dog on orbit, I think your dog would probably flip out.
Sex in space, has it happened?
You can't stop.
I know of at least one panic attack in space.
I think it would be overwhelming.
My wife said it took 2 weeks to get the smile off my face.
There are some things that are worth risking your life for.
After defying NASA and seducing the Russians with $20 million, American millionaire Dennis Tito became the first to boldly go where no vacationer has gone before, when he took one giant junket for mankind to become the world's first ever space tourist.
Dennis, how was your flight? Great! Best of all.
Tito's cash and the attention he has generated has sent space tourism developers like Space Island Group spinning into warp drive.
The first one will be ready about 2007 or 8. We'll build another one every year after that. Now, in the ring will be dining areas, dancing areas, quite a range of entertainment.
Now, mega billion-dollar plans and fancy animations are popping up everywhere. But back here on terra firma, it's still nearly impossible to book a space vacation without getting laughed at.
And we want to see if we can book a honeymoon in space for the two of us.
Okay. Sorry, you don't want to go to space, do you?
Yeah, we do.
You want me to book you to go to space?
Yeah.
Do space.
Space, outer space, where there's no air and there's a little capsule and you float around.
Oh my God.
We know it's quite expensive.
Despite that kind of skepticism, several space tourism companies are already taking 5-figure deposits from wealthy wannabe astro tourists.
You're better off leaving from the UK because otherwise things aren't as cheap.
Right.
And why not take a space vacation? Thanks to Hollywood and NASA, the public perception of space travel is like a cross between Star Wars and the Blue Lagoon. But as you're about to find out, the reality is often closer to Gilligan's Island. You may well have the right stuff to take the greatest vacation awaiting mankind.
Fire.
But before you book the ultimate frequent flyers deal, you should learn a little bit more about the real stuff, the 10 funniest, freakiest things you never knew about space travel. First of all, you can forget about checking in late with a massive pile of luggage. You'll need to get there about 6 hours early, mostly to put on the 130 pieces of your itchy, pinchy 12-layer rubber and nylon flight suit. There'll be no fancy people movers or rolling bridges at the spaceport, just a little silver bus to take you out to the pad. The security check is a major 23-point hassle, and although you paid $20 million, your seat will be decidedly less comfortable than international first class.
Imagine taking your chair and attaching it to the wall, bolting it on by the feet, and then sitting in that chair, laying back.
You crawl across the bathroom door, you stand on a panel in the back of the shuttle, and then hoist yourself up into the seat, and you're strapped in.
One of the first things that happens when you elevate feet is, with all that blood going into the body, the kidneys start working really well, and you think, gee, this is getting fairly uncomfortable.
And of course, not too surprising, you may discover that you gotta go to the bathroom while you're laying there. And we wear diapers underneath the pressure suit.
We were strapped in quite early, I think about 3.5 or 4 hours before liftoff. You sit there with nothing much to do.
No light reading, no Walkman, no roaming the cabin. It's just you and your fear of flying.
Once you light them, they're just like fireworks. They're going to burn until the fuel's gone. And so you're along for the ride.
The whole thing moves forward and then comes back, the so-called twang, and then it lifts off.
You're sitting on 4.5 million pounds of explosive. It is violent and it's crude.
It's like driving down a washed out gravel road because you're just kind of shaking around in there.
You then go over on your back. That's kind of uncomfortable. You definitely can tell that you're in a heads down attitude.
Here you just keep going and the G's keep getting larger. In the Earth, you can start to see the sky turns black.
You know, there's no way you're not going to think about the fact that Challenger took place and what happened on Challenger.
Challenger, go and throttle up. Challenger, go and throttle up.
The boosters are pushed away from the shuttle with small rockets.
There's a big explosion coming up, guys.
And those rockets fire right back over the cabin.
Okay, they're staging.
The cabin is engulfed in flame.
And then all of a sudden, you're thrown forward in your seat, and then you're squashed back into your seat again. And that whole process has been referred to by many crews as the train wreck.
Atlantis, prepare to shut down engines.
Yes, you're there, you got enough velocity, and the engine's shut down. It's like,
Oh boy, that felt good.
yes! I mean, it's one of the biggest, best feelings you could ever have.
That was surreal. Are we really here?
Because if you're not afraid during launch, you're probably not smart enough to be there.
Right after the engine's cut off, you know, you start to see things float.
One of my crewmates let out this war whoop.
Then I became aware of this sort of giddy sensation.
I took the pencil off the kneeboard, put it out in front of me, and let it go, and it just stayed there. And I laughed.
And it was like, wow, you know, it works.
You know, this is really, really cool.
I mean, I have a physics degree. I know it works. But to see it work, that's another thing to just say, yeah.
You will find being weightless like magic. And sometimes like black magic. This is the way water behaves in space. Without gravity, it floats and shimmers. Beautiful, isn't it? Of course, on Earth, water flows downhill, as does everything else. It may not be as beautiful as space water, but it's a lot more convenient.
I know that most of you really want to ask, how do you go to the bathroom in space?
Say hello to your friendly neighborhood space toilet. Without gravity's helping hand, some of your greatest space adventures will be in the bathroom.
All the astronauts I've heard about say that whenever they go into a question and answer session with the public, that's the first thing they want to know.
In fact, the question is even the name of a book by Skylab astronaut Bill Pogue. The public is not the only group obsessed. The space potty generated more complaints among astronauts than any other piece of equipment, and it was the subject of the greatest untold story in the history of space disasters.
Unlucky astronaut who happens to be a friend of mine floated into the commode, closed the curtain, did his business, and when he stood up, found that the fan was circulating in the wrong direction. And so anything that was supposed to be going down was coming up. And so the space shuttle just flooded with material. If you ask me, that would have been my cue to go up to the flight deck, push the abort button, and tell Houston, we have a problem, we're coming down.
So it should come as little surprise that the space potty is the only equipment that has been redesigned after each of the first 24 shuttle flights.
The biggest challenge for the whole life support habitability area was the toilet design.
The astronauts had had enough, and a nationwide call went out for an engineer with special skills to solve NASA's special problem.
We went looking for a very special engineer who, might have a motto like one man's waste is another man's resource.
Enter Donald Refke, the mad scientist of Hamilton Sunstrand. Refke's work was serious, but delicate. And to balance these two requirements, he created an alter ego. Dr. Flush.
Guess what? Now we can talk about the right stuff, okay?
All kidding aside, Refke's team and the task they were charged with were no laughing matter.
We had roughly maybe 40, 50 people, inspectors, machinists, assemblers, engineers, microbiologists. We have roughly 4,000 pieces between the seat and the septic tank. That includes the motors, the electronics, the sensors, the compaction devices, and all that, and you're talking roughly 500 engineering drawings. So we're talking maybe a couple million for one bathroom.
All this engineering solves one simple problem: how to separate astronauts from their leftovers in the absence of gravity.
We do have to kind of produce an artificial way to get it away from your body. We have a small fan down there, and we have to keep you-know-what from hitting that fan. And what we do is we have a small airflow that tends to pull the solids away from your body.
The air comes from the cabin, but where does it go after it's been used?
The air would come through the commode. It comes right back in the cabin after it's properly deodorized and filtered for gases and other materials.
Well, it seems simple enough to work, but you have to remember to strap your feet in and swing these handles over your thighs, or else...
You have to hold yourself down to make sure you don't float away, kind of, and have a premature liftoff or using the bathroom, so to speak.
To prevent any unscheduled launches, NASA requires all its astronauts to qualify on a very special training device in Houston.
There is a way that you practice getting ready to go to the bathroom in outer space, and it's something called the Red Eye. It's a simulator down at Johnson Space Center, which involves a mock-up of the shuttle toilet seat with a camera, and it has a crosshairs, and you sit in there and you kind of sit down, and you learn very quickly how to orient things such that, you know, things go where they need to go.
Just how important is Dr. Flush and his next generation of space potties?
The work on the space station toilet is probably the biggest step forward to allowing tourism to fly. And without this, I couldn't imagine tourism could ever take that next big step.
May the flush be with you.
A small percentage of airline passengers get sick, but that number skyrockets when you leave the atmosphere.
Now, of course, a lot of people get sick on the first day. I mean, that's a widely known thing.
Some people report that they feel queasy and they know they're going to be sick.
So everybody's got their little bags tucked somewhere.
Some say they're surprised that they just throw up. It's almost like it's not them doing it.
Over 75% of astronauts get sick in their first 72 hours of space travel.
And that it's very pervasive, obviously. The cabin smells of it, and if you weren't going to be sick, you're going to be because the guy next to you just lost his lunch.
Imagine having the flu, seasickness, and a major hangover. Welcome to the first 3 days of your zero-G adventure.
The fluids in your body, which are normally pulled down by gravity, are not, and they rush upwards towards your head. It's called a cephalic fluid shift.
As demonstrated on NASA's Vomit Comet training jet, liquids drift upwards in zero-G. Your sinuses and lungs will fill to the brim, a condition called space flu.
It causes a congestion and a fullness in the head that feels very much as if you're standing on your head. And that causes some people to become ill.
And the net result is that you get a stuffy sort of head and a puffy face.
Most people get puffy and bloated on vacation, but this is ridiculous. Your inner ear fluids will be sloshing around violently, and instead of helping you keep balance, they will be giving you seasickness in the extreme.
What is really impressive is you move in your head motions, you get a much stronger sense of rotation than you do on Earth. That's what I remember. I thought, wow, you move your head and it's like you're just being thrown into a tumble.
NASA forbids spacewalks on the first 3 days in orbit, and you should forget about it too. While spacesuits are really $4 million miniature spaceships, their air filters can't handle solids, so getting sick in your spacesuit would be the kiss of death. As if you weren't feeling bad enough already, there is more. Scientists call it vertigo overload. It is mysterious, unpredictable, and it will make you very sick.
You're floating around, and if you've trained in a room in one orientation, if you enter it from a different orientation, you won't know where you are, you won't recognize the room, and your mind has to adjust to that very quickly.
Here I sit in this room. I know that there's a door to go out to the hallway over there. It's over my left shoulder. Well, if I flipped upside down, down is that way. I don't know where the door is anymore. Now I've got to think to myself, if that's down and that wall is over there, then the door is on, wait, no, that.
Without gravity as your guide, your eyes and your inner ear will engage in a violent disagreement on which way is up. This will overload your brain, and your stomach will pay the price.
Anytime you have this conflict with the eyes telling the brain one thing and the balance system telling the brain another, it gets interpreted as you've been poisoned. Those organisms that then throw up, basically perhaps getting rid of the poison, tend to survive.
And if space sickness affects most highly trained astronauts, imagine what it will do to you.
We were working up on the flight deck, and that day we had had ham salad tortillas for lunch. So I come diving through from the flight deck into the middeck, and I cannot quite figure out what I'm seeing. My buddy was floating in the middle of the middeck. By this time he had a bag, although it wasn't clearly doing a lot of good, but somehow it seemed that the stuff was hitting the bottom of the bag and coming out because he had a pink streak on each side of his head. And there were pink clouds, I guess you'd call them, floating all throughout the middeck. And my first thought was, I'm out of here.
Because unlike in an airplane, if you miss the bag, things fall hopefully harmlessly to the floor. In space, they just go everywhere.
You see astronauts a lot of times playing catch with M&Ms. They'll throw them at each other, or little goldfish or whatever might be in it, catch them with their mouths. That was where I learned you don't eat just anything that goes floating by, even if it looks like food. It might have been eaten once already.
Like any luxury travel cruise, you may expect fine dining to be a central feature on your space vacation. And at least according to some, you won't be disappointed.
We will be working closely with some of the largest and highest level hotels around the world, mostly the five-star hotels, in designing the meals that we'll be offering on board.
Currently, space cuisine is not quite so luxurious.
Luxurious, I wouldn't say. It's fun. It's fun because it's different, and you can play with your food.
One of our snack foods was peanuts. And it was fun to take a small group of peanuts and put them out in the middle of the room and then go to the wall and push from the wall over and try to gobble up the peanuts as you went by, kind of like a shark going through the water.
I saw Jerry one day, and he was over by the wall bracing himself, and he just pushed himself, and he opened his mouth open real wide, and he grabbed the peanut as he was flying across this open space. When I first saw him, I thought he had gone around the bend.
It's fun to just open up something and shoot your food at your mouth and catch it, or try and suck it up with your lips, or put a straw in and try and suck it up.
In fact, if NASA's experience is any guide, you'll prefer playing with your space food to eating it. Space food doesn't taste very good, and the problems once again are money and gravity.
Booster ignition and liftoff.
It costs about $10,000 to get each pound into space, so a juicy T-bone and baked potato would cost about $20,000, not including service. To bring the cost of space dining back down to Earth, NASA spends fortunes making it lighter by taking out the water content. This, unfortunately, also takes out the flavor content. For $20 million, you may be expecting bouillabaisse with French service, but you'll really be getting instant cup of soup. Do it yourself. So the food may not be 5-star, but surely the service will be.
And a waiter could literally float over, bring you your meal, and might even be a robot.
That would be great. But for now, this is your space kitchen. This is your space cuisine, and this is how you will make it. Just squeeze in the prescribed amount of water, squish it around for the prescribed amount of time, and hope for the best.
Sometimes that process works pretty well, and I remember, for instance, we had shrimp cocktail, which was freeze-dried. But one time you would do it and it would taste great, and the next time you would do it, and I don't know if you didn't knead it properly or what, and it would taste like cardboard.
And it won't smell much better than cardboard either. Without gravity, there are no air currents, and without air currents,
there's no hot air rising. The hot air is staying right where it is, so it doesn't come to your nose, so you don't get the smells as much. So it seems that people like their food spicier.
Not to mention the fact that your nose is congested from space flu. You may want to spice your food heavily, but don't expect curry in space.
You feel like you shouldn't eat anything that's too pungent or too strong smelling because you are closed into a pretty small area with your crewmate. So
you can get tang in space, but forget about Coke or Pepsi. Not that it hasn't been tried.
In 1985, Coca-Cola and Pepsi took a giant sip for mankind by launching the Cola Wars in space.
Essentially, both companies wanted to be the first colas in space, and they spent piles of money to create special space-safe cans and do a major splash on network TV and national magazines. But once the mission flew, the great Space Cola Wars fizzled. And the reason? The trapped carbonation was uncomfortable and needed to be relieved.
The trouble is, in space you can't belch because there's no separation of the fluids from the solids. And so if you belch, you're liable to bring something else up with it.
American spacecraft are alcohol-free, but the Russians have experience with drinking in orbit.
Russians, while officially weren't allowed to carry anything but water, milk, and the regular Coca-Cola products, they had little stashes of vodka and cognac that were put aboard by their engineering friends. And then if you notice on the back, it's got the directions on how to actually drink it.
Table manners will be very important in space. You may even need a refresher course.
If we bite a biscuit or a cracker, whatever crumbs occur fall down either down the front of us or on the table or on the floor. But in space, they'll stay right there. And then if you take a breath, you're liable to have them up your nose.
One thing to remember is that without gravity to keep it stuck on your spoon, your food will develop a mind of its own. So,
if you stop the motion on the way to your mouth, there was a good probability that it would come loose from the spoon, and then you'd be chasing it.
So it doesn't smell great, it doesn't taste great, but hey, it's fun. In space, you will be inspired, stimulated, emotional. You will feel more sensitive, more flexible, and stronger. You will be, in short, 16 again. And we all know what's on every 16-year-old's mind.
Most interesting thing, again, taking advantage of zero gravity. And one of the best things is going to be zero gravity sex. So honeymoons in space is going to be a great thing. We're going to have eventually the 250-mile high club. You're going to have all kinds of new positions, new ways of doing things.
You won't have any bed sheets, you won't have any water around you as you might do in a swimming pool down here. Of course, no clothing.
But before you try joining the 250-mile high club, a few words of advice.
Mechanically, it's going to be very difficult because everyone who does this or has done it has learned to do it on Earth at 1G.
But in 0Gs, Newton's laws take over. Every action creates an equal and opposite reaction. Push your partner and you both fly in opposite directions. As with most space problems, special equipment will have to be deployed.
So you really need a whole sling of pulleys and ropes and springs and harnesses just to keep you in place, just so the two of you can stay connected.
In fact, a sex therapist in Boston has patented equipment just for this occasion. So, are there any solutions to the sex in space problem? NASA has looked to the animal kingdom for some possible answers.
There are mammals that mate in very nearly 0G, and that is aquatic mammals. Porpoises and whales often have a third whale or porpoise that helps the pair that is mating by nudging and pushing.
So it may take 3 in 0G. Just make sure you get it right.
In fact, unless you understand the physics, you can have a disaster.
NASA officially denies any and all of the sex and space research that occasionally appears on the internet.
Our primary conclusion is that satisfactory marital relations are within the realm of possibility in 0G. We recommend that married couples considering maintaining their marital relations during a space mission be provided with an elastic belt, such as we use for Run 3.
In 1992, NASA did send a married couple up on the same shuttle mission. So, did anything happen?
Has it happened? I don't know. I'd be a little surprised. Again, take 5 or 6 of your neighbors, you all get in that SUV or a camper, and you stay in that camper for a week. And 2 of you sneak off to have a little rendezvous. It's just too many people all the time. I'd just be really surprised at that.
But our research has confirmed at least one instance of NASA-sponsored space mating.
The one on the right, of course, is a magnet, and the one on the left is just a pencil, and we had no idea they were going to decide to mate.
We're still waiting the results.
So it has been up to the other great space power to take the lead in this important field.
There have been a Russian film company that took up a Aleutian 76 MDK and did parabolic flights, and as they came over every hump in the in the parabolic flight plan, their actors would go at it, and supposedly it was a pretty entertaining video.
You think Colonel Granella could make love to you like I can?
So, if you have $40 million and a willing partner, you could become the first couple to join the 250-mile high club. But there's one last thing to bear in mind, if you'll pardon the pun.
Well, you know, odds are that one of the two will get sick pretty much as soon as they get up there. So if you're going to plan a honeymoon in space, you're going to want to plan a couple of extra days just in case somebody's not up to speed.
You want to get off your helmet?
For all the mischief it can cause in the kitchen and the bathroom, zero gravity comes in very handy in the playroom.
Anything that's in your hand becomes a toy.
And here comes Mr. Yo-Yo.
I've sometimes watched astronauts, and they'll be doing it unconsciously. I was watching a guy one time who had a film canister in his hand, and he was just sitting there spinning it. He'd spin it and watch it spin for a while, and it'd start to drift off, and he'd grab it. If it's your cup, you're going to do something with it and just watch it spin to see what it does.
Even in space, life's simple pleasures are the best. So, what other kinds of vacation sports will be in, and what kinds will be out? That depends on who you ask. Space promoter John Spencer.
You'll have the same kind of activities you have on an ocean cruise ship, and again, they'll have casinos on board, they'll have entertainment, Broadway shows in orbit, for example.
Actual aerospace designers like SpaceHab's Frank Eichstadt have a more down-to-earth view.
You're not going to go up there and play tennis. You're not going to go up there and have a swimming pool.
We're going to be able to have swimming pools or hot tubs or fun areas that are spheres of water that stay in a position that you want.
That sounds unbelievable, and it is. Besides being embarrassing, most vacation water activities will be impossible in zero gravity. But in space, a new class of water sports will keep you occupied. Zero gravity and high water surface tension will turn water into a slippery, slimy ghost, which will turn you, as it turns all astronauts, into Ghostbusters. You will blow on the ghost and make it shake like Jell-O and float away. Slice it in half and then squish it back together again. You will stalk it, torture it, and when you're finished, make it disappear. Dancing in zero Gs will present new and interesting opportunities in self-expression. And when it comes to dancing or tumbling or just having a good time, one thing is certain: the bigger the room, the bigger the zoom. Bigger is definitely better, and no one knows that better than the astronauts who flew the biggest space ballroom ever, Skylab.
You had a volume that was 22 feet in diameter and 32 feet tall, and so you had all sorts of room to experiment. Al Bean was a tumbler and a gymnast, and so he did a lot of tumbling. And we learned to run around the lockers, and it's a lot like a squirrel running in a little cage. You know, the faster you go, the more you stick to the walls, and which is basically what we did.
Skylab Mission Commander Bill Pogue took space dancing to the next level.
My daughter had suggested this, and said if you had swim fins, you ought to be able to swim in weightlessness.
And he put on a bump helmet and a pair of goggles, and if he wasn't the funniest looking thing you ever saw in your life.
But you actually could get up ahead of steam, and the only thing is you can't stop.
Of course, all space vehicles and space stations now have exercise facilities on board, because without at least an hour of exercise a day, you will lose both bone and muscle mass. But exercise inevitably leads to perspiration, and in space, that is a very bad thing.
The sweat would build up on our back, and you could feel it back there, moving kind of like thin jello. Of course, if you shake too hard, you'll shake it loose. But you sure don't want to shake a big ball of sweat loose and have it go drift off and hit your buddy.
Luckily, everyone's first choice of pastimes in space is clean and easy. Of course, the first and foremost preoccupation in space will be Earth gazing.
You guys should look out this window. Sorry you can't see it. Wow.
I think for anyone who has flown in space in near-Earth orbit to date, the most fascinating part of it is just the simple act of looking out the window back at the Earth. And there's no way that you'll ever get that view on the Earth.
Came up onto to Europe, like Italy really is shaped like a boot. And I was surprised to find that London has more lights than Paris does. And those kinds of visions are visions that you'll never ever forget.
At $10,000 a pound to get things up in space, count on very steep excess baggage fees. NASA actually employs an army of packers and stowers, including the world's preeminent space valet, Butch Doris.
If you had $20 million and you were able to go into space for a week, you need to be a good packer because this is the amount of space you would have to store all your clothing.
Some vacationers wouldn't dream of going on holiday without their pets, but as you may expect, there are different opinions as to the practicality.
We are going to allow pets and children to be brought up. We're going to have some limits on the pets themselves, the size of them. And
we think cats might wind up being very successful as space pets, particularly the short-hair or no-haired kind of cat.
There are others who think that bringing pets is a monkey of an idea.
A friendly little fellow in a form-fitted couch about to make his mark. And Ham is on his way.
They've had some experiences with animals on orbit, and they're full of surprises. If you wanted to bring your dog on orbit, I think your dog would probably flip out.
Third world vacations require a battery of exams and vaccinations. How about an off-world one?
They transferred directly from the helicopter to a mobile quarantine van.
Almost any medical condition that's chronic here on Earth would not be good to have those kinds of problems in space.
Kidney stones are a significant problem in zero-G. Things float around, things get dislodged. You don't want people going through that sort of trouble when they're on orbit and isolated.
Ditto heart disease, chronic headaches, chronic kidney stones, and from what we've seen of the kitchen and the bathroom, irritable bowel syndrome.
Certainly the astronauts are given very rigid screening tests of all sorts of physical dimensions.
We're going to insist that everybody bring in letters from their doctors saying that they can handle 2 or 2.5 Gs.
For laypersons, I'm sure that there'd be some shortcuts.
The doctor's letter will also have to say they don't have any communicable diseases that might be passed around aboard the station through the air conditioning systems.
Assuming that you either pass stringent NASA-style medical tests or get a note from your doctor, what other preparations can you expect to take?
We want to let the person experience the unusual kinds of things that are going to happen in space.
Some people feel what we call a roll. You get a roll counterclockwise or roll clockwise.
Ooh, now this is really, really weird.
After surviving your fitness test, you need to survive the crash course in practical training.
Certainly they need to know how to use the food system, the drink system. They need to know how to use the space toilet.
And finally, an abbreviated version of NASA's survival course in zero-G manners.
All the little rules about things like you don't set something down because it won't stay there, it drifts away in the air currents. You don't with an electric shaver then go and blow the whiskers out. If you move downward, your hair just goes up. You don't want to get caught in fans and this kind of thing. I might decide to float from one end of the compartment to the other, and if we are on a collision course, once we have pushed off, we can't stop anymore. There's nothing you can do. So you have to learn to push off, but before you push, you look.
According to most credible experts, all this training will take about 6 months, and assuming that you have the money, the time, the health, and the aptitude, there's still another hurdle to cross, perhaps the biggest one of all.
Well, you'll have to undergo psychological tests. They want to make sure you're not crazy and that you're not going to pose a hazard to the crew when you get up there, that basically you're a stable individual.
Astronauts are among the most highly motivated, highly selected, and highly trained professionals in the world because their working conditions demand it. But when you fly into those same conditions for a bit of R&R, you will be subjected to the same stresses and conditions, and you won't have 2 years of full-time training.
If you panic, you're not just endangering your own life, you're endangering the lives of everybody with you. You're in a very hostile environment where you can't afford to screw up.
You will have to be not just stable and adventurous, but very, very brave. And for very good reason. It's true. In space, no one can hear you scream.
Well, in space, nobody can hear you scream because outside it's a vacuum and there's nothing to carry your voice.
But inside, spacecraft are very noisy, 72 decibels on the average. The loudness of driving your car down a freeway with the windows open at 60 miles an hour.
And what makes it so loud?
Pumps for thermal control systems.
Your CO2 removal hardware.
Fans.
Water reclamation systems.
Your ventilation.
Air ducts with bins in them.
Bathroom facilities.
Humidity control.
All the systems that it takes to make that thing habitable.
Things that keep you alive. Things to worry about in your sleep. Things that might break and immediately terminate your vacation, or worse.
If something broke down, it could be potentially life-threatening.
In space, no one can hear you scream. But that doesn't mean you won't want to.
Just on the other side of that glass is the vacuum of space. You know, it's an extremely deadly environment.
If somebody was a little bit scared to do new and different things, I think they'd find the experience really terrifying and very unpleasant because there's all kinds of strange noises and experiences, and when the thrusters go off that might change your position to turn you one way or another, they sound like cannons when they go off on the front end. I mean, it's a boom, boom.
If you can float in the middle of the cabin and have them fire, then it slams you against the wall, and then you know you've been somewhere.
For a tourist, I think it would be overwhelming.
Yeah, that's not fun. It's not fun when weird things are happening if you're not the kind of person that just enjoys that constant stream of new and different.
What other kinds of new and different things might give someone a raging case of space panic?
I don't think anyone who suffers from claustrophobia should even consider going into space.
That would kind of not help if you're in outer space and suddenly, you want to get out. That's the urge you're going to have to fight for a week.
In fact, NASA puts their candidate astronauts through a claustrophobia test in a ball that they don't tell them ahead of time that's what it is. Because if somebody panics up there, what do you do?
It's enough to make you lose some sleep, and you wouldn't be alone.
We know that one of the principal stress factors in space is the loss of proper sleep.
Some people try to sleep with their arms just out and let them float. And many astronauts have reported that in their mind, their arms disappear.
The #1 prescription drug taken by astronauts over the year have been sleeping pills.
In the best of all worlds, assume that you would be able to keep your well-founded fears from getting out of control.
I could have blown my brains out or gone over Niagara Falls in a barrel or found some other decent way to die.
Even if it's just thinking we have some control, maybe we don't, but if we believe we have control of the situation, we're not likely to to have a panic attack.
But after a few strange days in orbit, all it might take is another alarm bell to send even the strongest vacationer reaching for the escape hatch.
I know of at least one panic attack that occurred in space. There may have been more. The last thing you want is someone opening the hatch.
You know, that's a single point failure. You open the hatch, everybody dies.
That's just one more thing to think about. So what would happen if somebody freaked out in space?
It's very important that those around you, the crew who's supposed to take care of you if you're a passenger, is also trained in being able to talk with you, handle it.
Just like you do here on the ground in a similar situation, you'd have to find a way to restrain them. Of course, there's always gray tape, right? Gray tape works for just about everything.
But once they are secured, what would happen? Would a $20 million passenger warrant an immediate trip home? And what would happen if everything worked perfectly and everyone was perfectly happy, but something unpreventable happened? How would you get home? Who would you call? Because in space, 911 is a joke. Trouble on a road trip? Call a tow truck. Trouble on a cruise ship? Call the Coast Guard. But in space, where so much can go so wrong,
the destructive might of incredible space rays that stop man from returning to Earth. Prepare for maximum acceleration.
Who do you call?
If there was an air leak, if something happened to the retro rockets that they didn't fire, you know, you probably wouldn't get home.
Okay, Houston, we've had a problem here. 5 guns. Go, guys.
A mechanical breakdown may prevent your return permanently from the final frontier, as it nearly did for Apollo 13.
Houston, we've had a problem. Go ahead, Flight. I want you to get some guys figuring out minimum power in the LEM to sustain life. I hate to put it that way, but, okay, now let's everybody keep cool.
Imagine yourself trapped, you and 6 other people, floating in an SUV high above the Earth. So, who would you look for if you had trouble in outer space?
All space yachts or cruise ships will have life pods, just like we have lifeboats. There'll be highly interactive sensing systems around all these ships, knowing if there's another ship coming, so your ship has to get out of the way so it doesn't hit it.
We will keep 2 complete space shuttles in orbit right next to the space stations with these large passenger compartments ready.
Well, that sounds great for the future. But for now, shuttles cost about $2 billion per copy, which is pretty expensive for an extra lifeboat lying around. The hard reality is you have 3 emergency evacuation choices. Option 1. Let's assume you phone NASA at the first sign of trouble. It takes the agency at least 8 days to prep the shuttle, roll it into place at half a mile per hour, and then fill it ever so carefully with 4 million pounds of high explosive fuel. After launch, add another day to catch your disabled ship in orbit. Assuming that your food, air, and water can hold out that long, you might just be able to hitch a first-class ride home. But if your ship is too disabled to dock with the rescue shuttle, you will have to find another way across the cold vacuum of space. Re-enter NASA's infamous claustrophobia ball, which was originally designed as an astronaut's last chance of escaping a crippled ship. The rubberized ball is filled with enough air to get you across the couple of hundred yards between your ship and the rescue shuttle, and hopefully you'll be snagged by your rescuers. But if not, you'll freeze to death before you run out of air, and become a rubberized human satellite in low Earth orbit. Option 2. The International Space Station is currently equipped with Soviet-era Soyuz Model T space capsules as lifeboats. These vessels have been around unchanged since 1979. They are bigger than the NASA rescue ball, but not by much. U.S. astronaut Jerry Linenger, who spent 4 months on the space station Mir, takes us on a tour.
And this is the Soyuz rescue vehicle right now, and the hatch is right here, so it's a tight squeeze. I'll just demonstrate getting in, but it's not an easy way to get in this little vehicle. It's rather cold, not real comfortable.
Unlike the old Apollo capsules which splashed down at sea, Soyuz is a hard re-entry vehicle. In other words, rather than splashing down at sea, it crash lands in the desert. This may sound dangerous, and it is. In 1997, Soyuz retro rockets failed to fire, and cosmonauts Sibilyev and Lazutkin were seriously injured. In 1967, a parachute came undone during a Soyuz re-entry, killing cosmonaut Vladimir Komarov. And in 1971, a returning Soyuz sprang a leak, killing all 3 cosmonauts on board. So, ready for option 3? NASA is currently working on a lifeboat of its own, the X-38. The X-38 is a lifeboat in the classic sense. It's very small, fitting only 6 people lying flat on their backs, side by side on the floor. It has no engine, and once released, it plummets to Earth like a rock, at speeds of over 17,000 miles an hour. The ship is steered from the ground. A parachute is deployed at 350,000 feet. And at least according to computer simulations, the landing will be smooth and safe. But in several tests so far, things have been anything but picture perfect. So, the best option for surviving an emergency in space seems to be not having one in the first place. On most vacations, getting to your destination can be half the fun. On your space trip, the same can be said about your trip back home.
You know, the re-entry itself is spectacular because you're looking out the window and you're seeing, you know, this glow around you of the ionized gas.
Wow, that is bright. I almost hate to imagine what the nose looks like. Yeah, that's true.
A couple of people have described it as like being inside a neon tube.
Just like there's a spotlight on it, and you see the glow off to the side. I think the land of zero-G has left us behind.
Many long-term space travelers have a hard time readjusting to gravity upon return. Expect your re-entry to be a little less unsteady, but still very entertaining.
When astronauts come back, they'll be sitting at home a couple, 3 days after the mission, and they'll pick up a cup of coffee and drink it and just like forget and drop it on the floor.
They'd have a canned shaving cream and they'd leave it in front of their face, and of course it didn't stay there anymore.
Everybody does that. You drop things.
So I go down this hallway and I turn to go this way to go into where the shower is. And although I turned my body, I didn't actually go around the corner. I just kept going sideways down the hall.
I drove off the road to the right 2 or 3 times. I kept turning to the right.
Of course, I grab on the wall and I look around, see if anybody noticed me, and I walk back very carefully, and then I go in a straight line.
As with any vacation, you will soon find yourself readjusting to life's daily grind. But your trip to space may leave you changed in a way that will stay with you for the rest of your life.
Going into space literally and figuratively lifts you up above your earthbound experience, and it gives you a kind of a mountaintop experience.
You know, I was the same old redneck I always was, but I did have a much greater appreciation for other people's views, I think. I wish everybody could see this, you know.
My wife said it took 2 weeks to get the smile off my face. I enjoyed flying in space.
You certainly do gain an appreciation of the fact that the Earth is not infinite, because if you can go around it completely in an hour and a half, that means that it is a finite thing.
There are some things that are worth risking your life for. And I would say, you know, if the burning passion is there to go, and it's something that you're just compelled to do, that you should follow that compulsion and go.
It is about this great secret that lies beyond the atmosphere, that lies up there where things float around and in which you can look out the window and see your home planet. It's something that I think is going to have profound effects on the people who get to do it.